The rain fell heavily over the city the morning Emily Carter arrived at the Harrison estate. At 35, Emily had already lived through enough disappointments to stop expecting life to become easier. She had spent years moving from one temporary job to another, cleaning hotel rooms, caring for elderly patients, working double shifts in restaurants. Nothing ever lasted long. Nothing ever truly felt like home. After her mother passed away 3 years earlier, Emily had been completely alone. So when she saw an advertisement searching for a live-in housekeeper and nanny for a wealthy widowed businessman, she hesitated before applying. Jobs inside rich families were rarely simple. Money could buy beautiful houses, but it could not guarantee kindness. Still, she needed work. And somehow, something about the advertisement stayed in her mind. 2 children in need of care. Not supervision. Care. That single word mattered to her. The Harrison estate stood on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by iron gates and old trees that swayed under the stormy wind. The mansion itself was enormous, elegant, expensive, and strangely lifeless. Emily followed the house manager through the silent halls. Her footsteps echoed against polished marble floors. No music. No laughter. No warmth. Only silence. "This way," the manager said politely. Inside the study sat Daniel Harrison. Emily immediately recognized him from business magazines she had once seen in waiting rooms. He was successful, wealthy, respected, the owner of several construction companies across the country. But the man sitting behind the desk did not look powerful. He looked exhausted. There was something permanently tired in his eyes, as though he had not rested in years. Daniel glanced at her resume. "You've worked with children before?" "Yes," Emily answered calmly. "For several families." "They all ended. One moved abroad. One no longer needed help." She paused slightly. "And one little girl grew up." Daniel nodded quietly. "You understand this won't be easy." "I assumed that." For a moment, he studied her carefully. Most applicants tried too hard to impress him. They smiled nervously, spoke too much, or acted intimidated by the size of the house. Emily did none of those things. "You know about my wife?" he asked. Emily lowered her eyes respectfully. "I'm sorry for your loss." The room became silent. Victoria Harrison had died 2 years earlier in a terrible car accident during a winter storm. The tragedy had made headlines for weeks. Since then, Daniel had withdrawn from public life almost completely. His children suffered the most. 10-year-old Ethan barely spoke anymore. 7-year-old Sophie had become angry at the world. Several nannies had already quit. One lasted only 5 days. Daniel closed the folder. "My children don't trust people anymore." Emily answered softly, "Children usually stop trusting when too many people leave." Something changed slightly in Daniel's expression. "You start Monday." The first weeks were harder than Emily expected. Ethan avoided her completely at first. He stayed inside his room for hours, speaking only when necessary. Sophie was far more difficult. She refused meals, ignored instructions, and tested every boundary possible. One morning, Sophie looked directly at Emily and declared, "You're not our mother." Emily crouched beside her calmly. "No," she answered gently. "I'm not." The little girl looked surprised. Most adults immediately tried to comfort her. Or replace the truth with false kindness. "But I can still care about you," Emily continued. Sophie said nothing after that. Yet something in her eyes softened slightly. Emily slowly learned the invisible pain hidden inside the house. Victoria's photographs still stood everywhere. Fresh flowers appeared beneath her portrait every Monday morning. Daniel rarely spoke about her, but grief followed him into every room. Some nights, Emily heard him pacing alone downstairs long after midnight. Other nights, she noticed him sitting silently in the garden, staring into nothing. He loved his children deeply. But he no longer knew how to reach them. Loss had created distance between all of them. One evening, Emily found Ethan awake late at night in the library. He quickly closed his sketchbook when he saw her. "You draw?" she asked softly. "It's stupid. Can I see?" Reluctantly, he handed it over. Emily's eyes widened. The drawings were beautiful, detailed pencil sketches of landscapes, buildings, and faces filled with emotion far beyond his age. "You're incredibly talented." Ethan shrugged awkwardly, though she noticed the faintest hint of pride. "My mom liked them too." Emily carefully returned the sketchbook. She had good taste. That was the first real conversation they ever had. After that night, Ethan slowly began opening up to her. Sophie took longer. The little girl missed her mother desperately but expressed it through anger. One afternoon, after refusing to go to school, Sophie suddenly screamed. "Everybody leaves anyway." Emily froze. Sophie burst into tears immediately afterward, as though the words had escaped before she could stop them. Without speaking, Emily sat beside her on the floor. "I know what it feels like," she whispered quietly. Sophie looked up. "My mother died too." The little girl's crying softened. "And you were sad?" "Very sad." "Are you still sad?" Emily smiled gently through watery eyes. "Sometimes sadness stays with us. But eventually, we learn how to live beside it." That evening, for the first time, Sophie hugged her willingly. Months passed. Slowly, life returned to the mansion. Emily cooked homemade dinners that filled the house with warmth. Music played softly in the mornings while the children prepared for school. Ethan began showing her every new drawing he made. Sophie followed Emily everywhere like a shadow. And Daniel. Daniel began smiling again. At first, it happened rarely. A small smile during breakfast. A quiet laugh after one of Sophie's dramatic stories. Then more often. Sometimes Emily caught him watching the children from the doorway with an expression almost painful to witness, relief mixed with disbelief. As if he had forgotten happiness could still exist inside his home. One snowy night in December, Sophie became seriously ill with a high fever. Daniel panicked immediately. The memory of losing his wife still haunted him, and fear overtook reason far too quickly. But Emily remained calm. She stayed beside Sophie's bed all night, checking her temperature, cooling her forehead, and whispering comforting stories until the child finally slept peacefully. At nearly 4 a.m, Daniel entered the room quietly. Emily had fallen asleep sitting beside the bed, still holding Sophie's tiny hand protectively. Daniel stood there for a long time. Something inside him changed forever in that moment. Because Emily wasn't caring for the children out of obligation. She loved them. Truly loved them. After that night, Daniel could no longer ignore what he felt. It frightened him at first. Loving someone again felt almost disloyal to Victoria's memory. For months, guilt followed him everywhere. One evening, after the children had gone to sleep, he finally spoke honestly. "I thought my life ended when my wife died," he admitted quietly while sitting with Emily in the kitchen. Emily looked at him carefully. "You survived," she said softly. "That's different." Daniel gave a weak smile. Some days it didn't feel different. Silence settled warmly between them. Then he asked quietly. "Do you think it's possible to love someone twice in one lifetime?" Emily answered without hesitation. "Yes." His eyes met hers. "And I think real love would never ask you to stay lonely forever." Daniel looked away suddenly, emotional in a way he wasn't used to showing. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope. The children noticed everything before the adults admitted it aloud. One afternoon, Sophie announced during lunch. "Daddy looks happier when Emily is here." Ethan smirked slightly. "That's because he's in love with her." Daniel nearly dropped his coffee. Emily turned completely red while Sophie burst into laughter. For the first time in years, the dining room sounded alive. Spring arrived slowly. The gardens bloomed again after a long winter. And one quiet evening, Daniel asked Emily to walk with him outside beneath the cherry trees. The sunset painted the sky gold and pink around them. "I spent 2 years believing my family was broken forever," he said quietly. "Then you walked into our lives." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "You brought this house back to life." Daniel reached into his pocket with trembling hands. "I don't just love you, Emily." His voice became emotional. "My children love you. This home loves you." He opened a small velvet box. "Will you marry me?" Emily covered her mouth as tears slipped down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. From the nearby garden, Sophie screamed with excitement because she had secretly been spying on them the entire time. Even Ethan laughed. Their wedding took place in early summer. It was small, private, and filled with genuine happiness rather than luxury. Sophie carried flowers proudly down the aisle while Ethan stood beside his father in a perfectly adjusted suit, trying very hard to appear serious. When Emily finally walked toward Daniel, both children ran forward and hugged her before the ceremony even began. Everyone laughed through tears. During the vows, Daniel looked at Emily and said quietly, "You didn't replace what we lost." His eyes filled with emotion. "You helped us live again." Emily cried openly after that. So did Ethan. And even Sophie, though she insisted afterward that she only had something in her eye. Years later, people would often describe the Harrison family as lucky. But luck had very little to do with it. What truly saved them was kindness, patience, forgiveness. And a woman who arrived at a lonely house during a rainy autumn morning, searching only for work. But ended up giving an entire family a second chance at love.